Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered what peptides are? Because people are talking about them all over the internet. But what are they? And should we be injecting peptides daily? Well, just so you know, most of them are not FDA approved or Health Canada approved, but there is one that you've all heard of that is a peptide. I'm talking an amino acid naturally made in your body called Ozempic. Wegovy, Ozempic, there's a few names for it, but it is a peptide and it's helping your aunt fit into her 1970 pair of jeans. So today we are going to talk to Dr. Vassily Eliopoulos, otherwise known as Dr. Vass. He is a physician from Boulder, Colorado. He has a longevity clinic and he's going to talk all anti aging, all regenerative health with us today. I'm so excited because I myself am into all of this and I want to know how I can glow and feel strong well into my 80s. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I introduce Dr. Vass.
A very commentary.
So, Doctor,
Awesome.
I have done a lot of research on you and I've been following you on Instagram. And I myself am totally into biohacking and longevity and all of those things.
Yeah.
And so I am so curious, and I know most people are curious as to what is biohacking and there's so many things out there about how to stay healthy into old age and so many different potions and lotions and everything else, but you are on the cutting edge of science. You do things that are more on the cutting edge. So tell me about what biohacking is, first of all.
Yeah, I think there's probably different definitions depending on who you talk to and what their perspective is. And so for me, I think, biohacking is a way of, I mean, at its root is how do you enhance how you exist in the world, right? Like, what's the point of what we're doing if we're not feeling good about ourselves and feeling good about what we're doing. And a lot of that gets down to how healthy we are physiologically. And so yeah, I guess this is sort of a vague answer, but the reality is, how do you be the best version of yourself that you can be? And
Yeah.
people have, I think, different sort of goals. So some people are really focused on, okay, what biomarkers could I measure and how could I optimize those? Right. And so these are things that you don't necessarily like visually see when we look at each other or look at yourself in the mirror, but can absolutely be measured and quantified using lab work and blood and urine and all the other sort of ways we could test ourselves. Other people are more focused on, maybe how they look, and that could be skin tone, color, vibrance, wrinkles. Other people are more focused on hair. Other people, from a biohacking perspective, are more focused on physical performance, right? So, like, if they're a runner, a cyclist, if they engage in a physical activity where they're, say, perhaps racing or competing. So I
Hmm.
think you could come at biohacking from a lot of different angles, but I think the sum for me of all of those different buckets of how you could look at it is, how do you be the best version of yourself with the particular goals that you have for yourself? And that could look very different from person to person.
Well,
So
it seems like historically, I mean, we always talked about nutrition. Nutrition was so important. And that in itself is very controversial too. Like, is it the carnivore diet, the Mediterranean diet? There's all these different diets, right? So you don't know what's
yeah,
good for you, what's not. Eggs are bad for you, then they're good for you. Then butter's bad for you, now it's good for you. Like, who people don't really know how to even approach this, I think, at times. And so then it was all about Botox and fillers and retinol and all of these things that are very topical and superficial. And now we've turned this corner of going deeper, not just food, not just aesthetic things, but just, and now we're going into this deeper cellular, looking at at anti-aging in such a different way, because we don't, everyone wants to live longer, but no one really, I don't think, wants to live longer if you're not able to live well.
Absolutely. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that gets to, sort of, how do you define, like, what is biohacking? It's like I said, how do you manifest the most successful, happiest version of yourself? And if aesthetics are the most important thing for you, how do you go about that? If it's, a time on a particular race or on a competition course, how do you go about doing that? And I think I agree that nutrition, like, and a lifestyle approach, meaning, and what does that mean? Like, from my perspective, when I say lifestyle, we're talking diet and exercise is sort of what most people think about. Like, what does my diet look like, and what is my exercise regimen? For
Hmm.
a lot of people, they think about that as being sort of the foundation of their health. I would, in my opinion, I don't know if I don't know if we've posted any of this, but I've given a number of lectures about, like, I have what I consider as the longevity pyramid. And it's sort of, like, we're used to the food pyramid, or, sort of like the foundations of what,
Yeah.
a diet, like, from the American, um, you know,
The
from
one we all
the
grew up with, all
agricultural
the food
perspective that
groups.
everybody should ignore, right?
Yeah.
But, from a longevity perspective, or from a biohacking perspective, what's really foundational, like, I would argue there's another layer deeper than nutrition and exercise. And actually there's probably a couple layers deeper, but one of them is rest, recovery, and recuperation.
Mm.
So I think there's a lot more awareness around this, particularly with sleep trackers and the data that can now be, very easily obtained around, are you getting adequate sleep? And then the scores that are assigned by the different, sleep trackers for, have you recovered
I've got
for,
mine on.
yeah. And so, I use an Aura Ring, but there are a lot of great sleep trackers. But the foundation of your health, your longevity, the foundation of any, in my opinion, biohacking plan, nutrition is part of that, exercise part of that, rest and recovery is part of that. And then what I would say is, and this loops back to what you're saying, is that important and foundational to all of that is how you measure these things. Because um, not too long ago, we didn't have great guidance. And to your point around, there's all these different diets, and I think people are feeling lost. Like, do I go vegan or do I go carnivore? You couldn't have two more, like, polarized ideas around what
Right.
nutrition should look like. And the reality is, the testing that exists now should underpin all of these decisions. So, I now have the capability to, between, like, my blood, my urine, my stool, and the imaging, and the genomics and the genetic data that we have, get a very clear picture of what an optimal diet should be for me and my specific genetics and physiology. And the same could be done for you.
I was
And
going to mention that, Doctor. Genetics also play a fairly large role in people's health, do they not? Like things you can't
yeah,
control.
so I think there's a nuanced answer to that. The short answer is yes. There's certainly certain genes that, if you have or don't have a very deterministic or fatalistic, like, are you going to get a certain thing or not?
Mhm.
Most other things, most of our understanding around genetics and our long-term health and the long-term epidemiologic data, meaning tracking people and populations over time, which is not a perfect way to do science, but it's sort of the best that we have for real long-term human outcome data, as it currently exists. What I'm
Sure.
referring to specifically here is the blue zone research.
Yeah, the Centurions, yeah, or the Blue Zone, yeah.
And the reason I'm referring to this is because, like, I've, you know, been witness to this through my career where, it was pre-med school when they were sort of identified and defined. But through my, medical school and my training and my professional career, I've sort of watched this data unfold. And when it started, when the scientists, when these areas were originally identified, they were identified really by journalists, not scientists. But the scientists jumped on board and they were like, we got to go study these populations because we were certain, the scientific community was certain, we're going to find the gene or the genes that are the secret. Like that was part of the drive because the genome was being sort of defined at that time, and our understanding of genetics was really sort of blossoming, and we were getting a lot more capability around the diagnostics and the definition that could be done with genetics.
Right.
And as I remember it, and people were talking about, we're going to find the genes that these people have that the rest of us don't, and it's going to change how we do medicine and longevity. And you come full circle, the reality is, and the outcome of that was, there is no magic gene or genes. It's actually 70% lifestyle.
Right.
So
Community.
if you had to break down what they found with that research, it was like, okay, 30% of your long-term health and outcomes is genetically based. But what that means is about 70% is under your control.
Wow.
And that's, the evidence for that, it was not just they didn't find special genes that these populations had that the rest of us didn't have, but also was demonstrated as people emigrated or moved from these areas and came either to the US or to Europe or,
Right.
or other areas within the region, they lost their longevity benefit. And
Interesting, because I
they
think one of
started,
those zones is in Loma Linda, California, right? One of those.
absolutely. Yep, that's correct.
And what
So
did they find about those? Because I know community is really important, and then also they look at the diets of these people.
it's really, you hit a between those two things, and it's the exercise and the way they exercise. So it's sleep, rest, recovery, and what's important there is community. Because one of the foundational components of that rest recovery is having a sense of connection to people who you love, people who love you back, people who you are like being around. So people who make you happy, people who you are you want to forgive, people you have gratitude for. These foundational sort of feelings, or I'm not even sure what the right term is, but
They feel purposeful, like it makes
and
a person feel like they have purpose in life.
so more important than what you eat, more important than how you exercise and what exercise you do, are these foundational things that I think are inherent to humans, and maybe to other to other, living things, that in a way that we don't know how to quantify or define yet.
Right.
But having a connection, understanding that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves, because that community component is really, really important. It's not just about me. It's about me being the best I can be in a community that I'm happy to be contributing to, and that I'm getting up every morning eager to fulfill whatever that purpose is, not just for myself and my own sense of well-being and gratitude, but also for what I'm contributing to the people who I love.
That's so beautifully said. I love that.
And the reality is, if there is one thing that you could do for your longevity, for how you feel, for for your health, it would be finding and connecting to that purpose, and sort of the set of 5 things that I think sort of encompass this sort of difficult to define and often difficult to talk about sort of qualities and characteristics that are incredibly foundationally important for your health. It's how do you manifest, love, empathy, gratitude, forgiveness, and compassion for yourself and for your community and the world around you. And if there's anything that you could do that will benefit your health and longevity, it would be to spend a little bit more time thinking about those things and how you bring those things into the world. And I'm going to get a little bit existential here, but the reality is we like to focus in medicine on the things, the data, the things we can measure, the things that are quantifiable, like the hormones and the
Right.
nutrients and all the like the genetics and all this stuff that we've talked about. And what's clear to me and clear to many of the people who look at this science is that it's these harder to define qualities and components that are absolutely essential for your long-term health and well-being.
It'd be interesting to study people who are not all in these groups, but even individual people that lived to be centurions, and what have they done differently. That my grandmother lived to 104 years old, and she was active up until 103. And so and her whole family, she had 11 children in her family. She died, or they all were long gone before my grandmother passed. But she always wondered, what have I done how have I lived this long? And so I asked her, and she had three answers to that question. And she said, one is, I hate history. I don't think about the past. So I think that's probably related to stress. So she's had a lot of stress in her life, but she said, it happened yesterday. I don't think about it anymore. I have to go forward. The second was, she did not like water. She didn't drink water. She got all of her water from fruit. She ate fruit like every day, all the time. She would have some things with water, coffee, or tea.
Yeah.
And the third thing was, she had a whiskey sour. So, I mean, you never know, right? You just never know, like, what it is that I mean, these things, I think that's why what you're saying is so poignant and so profound, because not that my grandmother was doing all these extra things, but she was a one-off in her family that lived to that ripe old age.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder what it was.
Well, I love what she said about you know, I don't like history and why worry about what's happened?
Hmm.
And so bringing this back to things that we can quantify, that we can measure, that we know impact our health, inflammation is, it's one of the big bad uglies in the world of aging and longevity and biohacking. And the reality is one of the biggest drivers of inflammation is chronic stress. And we do that to ourselves with the worrying and
Yeah.
the smoldering on these issues that are out of our control. And so I love, what your grandmother said around, like, why worry about the things that you can't control? Let's look forward and let's move on. And I love the other thing that you said was, that she stayed active, because this is another foundational component. We talked a little bit about exercise, but the people in the blue zones and people who tend to live a long time, they're not training like Olympic athletes.
Yeah, she never
But
exercised really, but she was like, she could walk faster than I could through the mall, and she worked at it. She had her own collection agency. She collected debts for physicians that they weren't paid. My grandmother
yeah,
had her collection agency, and she worked into her 90s collecting,
yeah.
still
So
sending out letters.
staying mentally engaged,
Yeah.
mentally active, and physically active in a way, you're moving your body on a regular basis in a way that you can keep doing for as long as possible. And I'll loop this back to some of the sort of more existential things I was saying, is that if your form of exercise is something that you love doing,
Hmm.
guess what? You're going to do it more, and you're going to do it more often. And it's not, I guess part of, when I formulate longevity plans for people, it's like, how do you manifest that purpose in these other sort of strata of the longevity period or longevity pyramid or plan,
Yeah.
it's by incorporating things that you enjoy doing.
Now, doctor, I have to ask you, you were an ER doc, right? You started as
Yeah.
an emergency room doc. What made you stop that life, which I'm sure was very stressful, and
Yes.
go into longevity? What made you make that change?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, because it's foundational in, why I'm here doing what I'm doing. So I chose emergency medicine, I think, for all the right reasons for myself at the time. And I loved emergency medicine. It was, and in some ways I don't miss practicing emergency medicine, but I love some of the tenets of emergency medicine, which is emergency, doctors these days tend to be very siloed, right? Like I have
Hmm.
a lot of friends who they're successful doctors. And I don't want to pigeonhole, but if you're successful in in medical school and in the medical education process, you tend to continue to specialize. And so, and this isn't true for everybody because some people choose a different path for a different reason. But I have friends who like they only deal with like the electrical system of the heart, meaning they don't even ask
That's
them
all
about
they know about.
blood pressure. That like that's it.
Yeah.
They're just electrophysiologists. Like they'll even say like, don't even ask me about blood pressure and cholesterol and all this other things you think cardiologists are focused on, because all I do is I work on the electrical system. Like that's it. And for me, emergency medicine was a way to have um, a high level of technical skill, because there's a lot of procedures involved
Mhm.
in taking care of people in that way.
It's
Um,
certainly diverse, emergency medicine, right? You're
yes,
dealing with all kinds of ailments of people.
yes, and it's more akin to what I think that when you think of like the traditional family physician in say the 50s or 40s, where they delivered babies and they did internal medicine things and they did pediatrics, and it was more of like you take care of the whole person as opposed to just one really sort of narrow
Hmm.
facet of their health. And to me, that sort of that made sense to me in what I wanted to do. And so I love that the education that I got. But what I found personally was um, I wasn't affecting. I saved many, many lives.
I'm sure you
Thousands
did.
of lives probably over my career in the emergency department. And in the end, I felt like I wasn't really solving the true problem, right? Like you can solve the problem of the moment.
Yeah,
And
like a mechanic.
yeah, from a technical term and
Right.
prolong life, but I didn't feel like I was prolonging quality life in a way
Hmm.
that was sustainable in the way I had envisioned when I, wanted to be a doctor when I, was a young child.
Wow.
It felt very different to me. And I felt like I was doing things, people were in a revolving door. You come in,
Yeah.
you touch them up, you send them out, and they're right back eventually with a problem, the root problem we never really addressed. And with time, that became philosophically a problem for me.
I understand that
And
though. I understand what
yeah,
you're saying. And I think a lot of physicians are not treating the person as a whole. You're treating it each part. You're just treating parts and then there's no one in control, right? I think that's been a really big problem.
and people, I think people feel this,
Hmm.
when you walk into your medical industrial complex center, which what I'll say is like, it's easy to get critical of the system. And I for sure can be critical of the system. That said, I'm a product of the system and I respect the system for what we do well, right?
Right.
Like if you're having a heart attack or you got hit by a truck or if you're having your medical catastrophe, like run, don't walk, you're going to get some of the best care in the world because
Right.
we're very, very good at that kind of care. The problem is most people who are healthy, who care about themselves and are trying to do the right things, don't really need that kind of care most of the time. What they need help with is figuring out sort of where we started, which is okay, diet. There's a lot of confusion around like what's really right for me. Exercise, I mean, I have some things that I like to, or I do by habit, but is there a way I could be exercising that would really enhance my
So basically, you're
longevity?
talking about preventative. It's very proactive, preventative medicine that you're dealing
Yes.
with now. Let's start. Let's fix it, or before it even starts, right? Like
And
let's
and
get you so healthy that you are not going to have these problems.
and the reality is, I think, from a macro perspective, if you look at our system, and this can get political, but I'd say apolitical on this, which is, if you look at the amount of money and the time and energy that we as a country put into healthcare, I think we could be doing that way more efficiently. And that I think we could get way better outcomes from an objective standpoint if we paid more attention to the foundational components a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
And so, for example, we tend to lose our 20, 30, early 40-year-olds from the system, right? Like, they have some medical contact, usually through school, and then they finish high school or college, and then they kind of drop out and they feel good, and they're generally, most people fortunately are generally healthy. And so they often won't see a doctor unless they break a bone or have some,
Right,
sort of
right.
issue that needs to be dealt with. And the problem is, a lot of the pathology that shows up later in life in these, big, bad, ugly diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancers, autoimmunity,
They've
all
been brewing.
they're sitting there brewing,
Hmm.
unrecognized, undealt with, undiagnosed. And at that time, very simple, easy changes to your regimen could put you on a trajectory that, could be a totally different place from where you're likely to end up if you don't address those
And
issues.
I think it's so interesting with because I'm kind of dipped my toe into this, so I'll let you know what I've been doing.
Yeah,
So
yeah, tell me.
I've been using peptides. I've been
Yeah,
pinning. I use the pin word. I've been doing some peptides. I've been taking NMN. I last year I did function health, so I did just
great.
the biomarkers. So
Yeah,
I did I think 132 markers they check.
yeah,
I had 17 that were off or above or below. Most of those were hormones, and I have some heart arrhythmia, but we sorted that out. I've got a doctor at Cleveland Clinic who has put me
great.
on an arrhythmia drug. So, and I think that was from COVID. So,
Yeah,
other than that, I was 15 years younger than my biological age, so I was really happy. But that's
yeah,
really what got me kind of going on. Okay, what can I do? I might have the grandma gene somewhere in there, hopefully, God willing.
for
Um,
sure.
but I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So, what on? Because I want to get into peptides with you a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Just for everyone listening, tell us about your clinic and what you do at your clinic because it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I practice medicine the way I believe medicine should be practiced, which is, we bring people in and we do a full head to toe assessment. And that doesn't just include the biomarkers, it includes the genetics, it includes the stool, the urine, the gut microbiome, as well as a full strength and mobility assessment, a full fascial tissue assessment,
Wow.
and ultimately the head to toe imaging, so whole body MRIs, CCTA of the heart to look at the coronary vessels. And this workup, although we have sort of a general structure for what we typically do, at this point, this workup is custom tailored to each individual patient. So, for example, um, some people might have musculoskeletal issues, like, oh, my low back, knees, and ankles, or are preventing me from, I'm having pain, and they're preventing
Right.
me from being able to do what I want to do. Other people have different family historical issues that they're concerned about, like, say, dementia or heart disease. And so we can focus in a little bit more closely on those particular systems, if we need to, based on what we sort of figure out in our pre sort of retreat assessments. But ultimately, people come out physically to where I am in Colorado, and we do that head to toe assessment, which typically takes 1 to 2 days, depending on the workup.
Okay.
And we assemble that data in a way that is digestible and understandable. And most importantly, create a plan that they can execute on, because where a lot of these sort of like plans fall short is they do a reasonable or an okay job of doing the diagnostics,
And
but
there's
then
no follow-up. Then you need a
you know
follow-up.
like, here's the information, here's what we recommend, good luck. And the
Hmm.
reality is, most people can't execute on that. Like, where do I get the stuff? How do I implement it? How do I make like these diet changes sustainable?
Well,
And
I love it
so,
because you're an MD and you also are very accepting of some of these supplements and other medicines, if you will, that are not fully FDA approved, but have been working for such a long time and have proven to be effective. So, I mean, one of the things I know that you prescribe, because you've talked about it on Instagram and I mean,
yeah,
I've seen you talk about it, is peptides.
yeah,
And I think peptides are so interesting. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that one of the most well-known peptides that probably, the ant that can't fit into her 1970s jeans are on is Ozempic.
yeah,
And it's a peptide, but the FDA
yeah.
somehow approved that, but the other ones are not okay.
Yeah, well, so there's a whole backstory here, which is the reality is, so what are peptides? Peptides are simply proteins. That's it. Like the scientific term peptide versus protein, a peptide is 50 amino acids or less. So really, when we say peptide, we're saying small protein. So it's
Okay.
like saying it's a small protein medication or supplement. Like, that's it. That's what a peptide is. Most peptide therapies are proteins or peptides that have been identified in human or animal tissues that we know serve a particular function. So, for example, the GLP-1s, I mean, this is a natural, a glucagon. Anyway, they're naturally occurring proteins that are present in your pancreas and are released when, as part of your digestive process, and and they serve certain functions. And the reason why these have gone through an FDA approval process are those peptides are large enough that they were able to swap out some of the amino acids to enable patenting of that product. Because one of the things that most people don't understand or realize, and it's important to bring it up in the context of peptides, is that you can't patent something that's naturally occurring
Correct. Yeah.
unless it's either modified in some way. So you could maybe alter the delivery into a time release, but it can't just be the natural molecule that's identified in our body. Those are things that are, there's no process by which to
They're
protect
more naturopathic.
it. Yeah. So I guess my point is Ozempic, the semaglutide, they were able to swap out actually 3 amino acids to make it something new. So technically it's a different molecule, but it serves the same or maybe slightly enhanced function from what the natural protein does in your body.
Right.
And so, I'm critical, and you've probably heard me, like I harp on big pharma. I guess what I would say is I appreciate the benefits of the things that we can get from the pharmaceutical industry,
Of course.
because
Yeah.
there are definitely things that have enhanced our lives and help us live longer, happier lives. And the way that system is developed, there's a flaw, because say you have a naturally occurring protein, like let's take BPC 157, for example. It's one of the most commonly used
I
non.
pinned that one.
Yeah,
I do
what's
pin
that?
that one. I do pin that one. I'll tell
Yeah,
you why in a minute, but go ahead.
yeah. So it's non-FDA. So why is it never been through an FDA approval process? Well, it's 15 amino acids, which means it's very short. And if you swap one of those amino acids out, you completely change the way that protein
Oh,
folds.
interesting.
It completely changes its function. So you turn it into something different. And so you have a protein, that can be highly beneficial for a number of different healing processes in our body, but doesn't fit the way the system is set up to bring a therapeutic to market. I think there was something around the public consciousness that happened in health around COVID.
That's interesting.
People were faced with, like, man, like we could die from this thing. It was scary. And then again, like politics aside, the way we as a system handled it was not ideal. And you could argue so
100%,
many different, right?
100%.
Like, so no matter where you're coming from, we didn't do, there was a little bit of like, man, this is who I'm trusting with. Like, we've just sort of given, we've abdicated authority. We just trusted these institutions, these people, and it's,
Yeah.
multiple different levels. And I think no matter who you are, from what perspective you come from, everybody took a little bit of a step back and was like, man, I think I need to take a little ownership over I
Yeah.
can't trust whatever, somebody else is telling me. I need to maybe like take a little ownership over this.
Yeah. The timing is right where people are now, they're questioning.
People realize like, hey, you know what? Like the healthier I am in general, the better off I'm going to be. Right? Like we all learned that in COVID, and it was just put front and center. It was like, hey, if you're healthy, you're pretty likely to do really well and really get out of this pretty much unscathed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you have other health issues, many of which are totally modifiable by, what you do, particularly with your diet and exercise, if you don't do those things, you're more likely to have a bad outcome. And so I think a lot of people started taking more ownership over their health and recognizing I can't just show up to my annual physical and
Yeah.
get all the information that's pertinent to me. Maybe I need to be looking a little bit deeper. And so I think there's been sort of a cognitive shift in how people think about their health.
Well, I know for
And
me, I was in a car accident when I was like 18 years old. I never did anything. It was some guy hit me at like 50 miles an hour. I was sitting at a light in my mom's car. And I've had chronic neck problems, like chronic pain for my entire adult life. And recently it's gotten worse. And so I went in for an MRI and I've got stenosis, I've got arthritis, I'm all in the C4, C5. And I know that one of the things they might suggest is making fusion, getting surgery. So I'm trying to go like, I don't want to have surgery. I don't, that's a risk for me to do that. So I went and saw a pain doc. I got cortisone injections. They did not work. He must have injected me for 3 weeks with like 25, 30 shots. It
yeah,
was horrific. I felt so sick from it that I ended
yeah,
up not going anymore. So then my son actually said to me, Mom, you should try peptides. Why don't you, before you go and get a surgery, why don't you try peptides?
give it a
So
shot. It can
I've been
happen.
doing BPC 157 plus TB 500 blend for about 6 weeks now. I think I have 2 more weeks left on
Yeah,
the cycle.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, this is a long chronic. It's not.
yeah,
It's a chronic issue, which might take more than one cycle of it.
totally. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but I have noticed, I bent down one day and thought, oh God, my back is going to give out. I felt this pain. Like I thought, oh God, I'm done for 2 weeks. Within a day, it was gone.
Yeah, you
And
were
I
back.
think it was from the BPC.
I, so this is where like hard scientists and people who want, like the data are going to say, well, it's anecdotal. You can't draw any
Yeah.
conclusions. And here's my personal perspective and my support of you is that I think at at the core in medicine, we love the data and we love to talk about evidence-based decisions. And if you actually get down to the reality and you see what we do on a day-to-day basis, most of the decisions that we make are not evidence-based because the evidence doesn't exist. Right down to how long
Right.
the antibiotic prescription you get is given to you for. Is it 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 2 weeks? Most of those are just like It's just what we learned to do.
Mm-hmm.
There's not great data for all of the different scenarios. And so we have to go off of our clinical experience and our intuition and our understanding of the human body to make the right decision and a discussion with the patient. This is the practice, it's called the practice of medicine for a reason. We
Right.
like to think of it as a science and protocol driven. And there are certainly things about medicine that are evidence-based and protocol driven. But the vast majority, in my experience, of what is done clinically, not just in the outpatient setting, but in the hospitals, is not that evidence-based. It's based off of our collective medical experience and what we know in our experience to work and not work. And
Yeah.
so what you can't discount that. And you also therefore cannot discount what the patient sees, hears, feels,
Correct.
believes, experiences. And you have to incorporate all of these things in an appropriately tailored medical or treatment plan. My father's Greek. We have a Mediterranean heritage. We have familial high cholesterol in my family. All the males in my family have, my cholesterol was like 450.
Wow.
If it's not actively managed, it's exceedingly high. That was found when I was very young. And it just, on a blood screen, at school, they just happened to check a total cholesterol and mine was like 370 or something like that. And I was in the fifth, sixth grade, healthy, young, skinny kid. And from that, we found all the males in my family suffered from the same thing. And I got to a point in my medical career where I was doing everything I knew to do. I was doing everything my specialist, subspecialist friends who knew all the right things. And I was not controlling my cholesterol in an ideal way. And I coded somebody who looked very much like me, who was younger than me. And I remember thinking, this is me in like
Yeah. Ticking
five,
time
7 years. Like that,
Yeah.
like I'm on the road to this
Right.
and I want something different. And to find the answers to that, I had to leave, I had to leave the farm, right? Like I had to
Right.
step out of what everything I had taught, everything that I believed, everything that I practiced in the traditional system. I had to leave and go to these woo-woo, crazy naturopath, whatever. I had friends who,
Wow.
sort of roll their eyes. And the reality is, I am better off now for implementing therapies and strategies that many of my friends and colleagues and even myself maybe made fun of and laughed at and rolled my eyes at a different point in my career. But this dogma of like, oh, it's got to be evidence-based and you need to have double-blinded placebo-controlled study to show, no,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you need to have an intelligence around the therapeutics. You need to look at the data that exists. You need to talk to the patient and you need to come up with a reasonable, rational solution to get them the answer or the issues that they need dealt with. And so,
Yeah. You don't just stick
uh,
them on a statin and don't look at them comprehensively, right?
well,
They're
and even I would argue that, so medicine has done itself a disservice in this protocolized, sort of data-driven paradigm, because right now the computers can do it better than we can,
no. Yeah.
way better. And so if you're a physician and you're stuck thinking you need a protocol or some decision tree to tell you how to treat somebody, the AI bots can do it better than you already. And if you don't think, the institutions are actively figuring out a way to remove you from the equation for cost savings, you're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's happening.
People want a physician who is willing to acknowledge the data, recognize and understand the data, and then apply it in an intelligent way, human to human.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not doing that, you are obsolete. We're doing ourselves a disservice in traditional medicine, um, in this regard, because we're discounting what people feel.
Mm.
they walk into the place, our hospitals, our institutions, and it feels empty. The soul is gone
Yep.
because we're so focused on trying to do it this data-driven way. And I'm not saying throw the data away. I'm saying we have to, the pendulum, in my opinion, swung too far. Like in the 50s, it was bedside manner because the reality of the therapeutics, we didn't really have a lot of therapeutics. So it was more about the interaction and the support, the emotional support. And I think we've gotten to a point where, like, as the diagnostics and the therapeutics get better, doctors want to be technicians. But
Yes.
what? A robot's going to replace you before you know it. If you're just a technician and you're not connecting to the human need, and you're not able to step beyond what the family tree decision, the decision tree of therapeutics is, you're not a physician. So I would argue we need to swing this pendulum back a little bit closer to what we had, where we bring the two together, and you listen to people. You're willing to step outside of the protocol when it's appropriate, when people understand what they're doing. Because I'll tell you, the biologics, part of why I'm doing what I'm doing, part of my own personal health journey, the biologics are the future of medicine, period. End of story, no questions asked. Stem cells, peptides, other therapies like that, like ozone therapy, these are the future. Stem cells, peptides, I have no doubt that with our technical expertise, we can make these peptides better.
Really?
Oh, yeah, no question. Stem cells, cellular therapies. I mean, look at immunotherapy. Like
Immunotherapy. Yeah, I was going to ask you
a
about that.
malignant melanoma was a death sentence not that long ago. But now, like, how are we treating it? We're taking the person's own immune cells, sensitizing it in a way that it can identify and attack the cancer, and giving them back to the patient, right? Like our cells are so much more intelligent than our understanding of medicine are. The knee-jerk reaction you're going to get from your doctor is there's not enough research.
Yep, that's what everybody says.
And here's I'm going to give you, I don't know if you ever saw that Seinfeld episode where there was the chart and they were like, what did they write in the chart? Like
No, I didn't see it.
there's certain sort of phrases and keywords in medicine. Okay. When your doctor tells you there's not enough research, it's highly likely that that's code for I don't know.
Good.
And I'm a little too proud, or I don't quite have the humility at this point in time to be honest with you about that.
I bet you they don't know. I don't think a lot of doctors know about it.
They don't know the data.
No.
If you ask them, okay, well, what studies have you looked at for BPC? How
Mhm.
many, what journals? What, I want you to show me did you look on PubMed? Was it Google Scholar? Like, was it the NIH database? Like, where did you actually look? How long did you spend, and how many studies did you see?
Interesting. Yeah.
And the likelihood is that for the vast majority of people who've said that about BPC or stem cells or A2M or ozone or any of these other biologic therapies, is they've looked at 0 studies and they assume that there's no research because they haven't heard about it at their annual
Yeah, they
conference.
kind of stay in their own lane. Everybody kind of stays in
They
their own
think
lane. They're not
because
venturing out.
I haven't heard about it, that it doesn't exist.
Now, I know you're a doctor that actually does peptides yourself, which is
Yeah.
awesome because you can firsthand then say that you do them. Which are
Yeah.
your favorite peptides? Like if you were to just say, okay, you want to start out in peptides,
Yeah.
and what are your favorite ones?
I think we've covered them because I think the most common peptides that are relatively easy to get relatively, and that have been used for decades. So although we don't have an FDA approved, or FDA data set around, we have years and years and years of people using them. Are the ones you mentioned: BPC 157, thymosin beta 4, GHKCU, CJC 1295, ipamorelin. Now there are FDA approved forms of that. Sermorelin and tesamorelin are FDA approved. So, you could use an FDA approved product in sort of that ghrelin category. I think those are a good place to start. But as you know,
So
there's
many
a
of
whole
them.
world, and there's, your body is intelligent, more intelligent than, than we are
Yeah.
in how it handles these things. And at the same time, I think it's reasonable to say, like, the right way to do this is with the proper guidance.
Sure. I could talk to you
Right.
forever about this, and there's so many subjects we could go into, and I'm
Yeah.
just like so grateful that you came onto the podcast and talked to me about this. I'm sure everyone will be fascinated by everything you have
Yeah.
to say. And
Well,
listen, I might become a patient,
yeah.
and I might have to send my son to come and see you.
Yeah. I'd be
See what we
happy,
can do.
happy. Yeah. Well, thank you. I really
for
appreciate
joining
you
us.
reaching out.
Yeah, this was excellent. It was so enjoyable, and you're such a wealth of information.
Thanks.
We will catch you, and hopefully very
Yeah.
soon.
Catch you on
Okay,
the road.
thank you.